Welcome to my channel, The Magic of Java. This is my third book called The Londo and the Green Queen's Revenge. It's a novel. It's a novel about me coming to terms with the attempted destruction of an Englishman and his Javanese family. But it is a novel. Yes, it's based on experience. It's based on real people and celebrities, but amalgams of real people or caricatures of them. So if you do identify yourself, please forgive me, because it's only intended as a yarn. Gunboats and Opium. The main preoccupation at Davos is about what leaders perceive to be the crisis of democracy, and not the real crisis of politics and leadership. Some months after writing this, I momentarily became a great fan of Western democracy. It was the Indonesian elections, and each home in Ardesa was visited and given $4 per head to vote for Suharto's son-in-law, except ours, despite him claiming that there had been major fraud by Jokowi's supporters. I imagined that they felt that a bully's household could not be so easily influenced, which was probably partially correct. But when my family didn't receive their ballot papers, thereby disenfranchising them, I realised that there was no point in wasting money on us. There is something about seeing all your neighbours rushing off to place their rotten votes which makes one keen to exercise one's democratic right. Not that I had one, but I was upset for my family. A feeling that was reinforced when my own mother was disenfranchised in the UK because she had no valid ID. But despite the bitterness of the Indonesian elections, subsequent events have left me to question if this wasn't a diversion to hide the deep state's real agenda. But then there is a subplot at Davos. Imagine an honest leader at Davos who is taken to one side and told that there is some confidential information that they need to be made aware of. Maybe it's about security, even terrorism. Of course, if that leader is German, then it would be indelicate to mention terrorism without first having inquired about their number twos. But the moment that leader listens to the information and does not disclose it, they are guilty of collusion. They are putting their trust in people who are already conspiratorial, or how else would they have the information, and putting these people and themselves above the public. In other words, they're acting in a godlike manner. The leader who remains well-intentioned, but how can we trust those sharing the information with them? We cannot, because we're ignorant of the information and those sharing it. And so honest leaders can become embroiled in dishonest collusion, for which there are always winners and losers. But this is the process how gross errors and mistakes are made. For if the information is not scrutinised by the wider public, then even clever leaders make mistakes. It is also the process by which we are manipulated and deceived, not so much by evil politicians or an evil elite, but by fallible humans who should respect us, if only because we too are fallible, but have the grace to accept this. But with manipulation, there is no freedom, only servitude. Terrorism is such a compelling fear that even previously liberal Indonesia has fallen into its trap. A dangerous logic to follow, as the argument is that Muslims represent a threat to humanity, and with Indonesia having the largest number of Muslims, it poses the greatest threat. But so few incidents with Indonesia has led it to investing in more Western surveillance systems so that everybody's phones are intercepted, not simply foreigners. Can Indonesia's policymakers be sure that this is the real agenda? Is it not more likely that such surveillance equipment can also be used to listen in on the listener? So the simple purchase of surveillance equipment has achieved more than the corruptors have ever managed. The ability to listen in on executive, legislative, judicial, even military decision making. There are so many countries like Indonesia where information is power that will have jumped at the ability to collect every communication on mobile devices by its citizens and those who visit the country without having the slightest clue on how to use this data. In fact, even in the US, there is enough evidence to suggest that the security services are drowning under a tidal wave of data, completely unable to detect the tsunami within the waves. Indonesia appears to have already spotted both the potential threat of the terrorism moral panic and the opportunity to jump on the bandwagon for its own propaganda. Call me a cynic, but the arrest of ISIS supporters planning to bomb the post-election demonstrations in Jakarta just prior to the demonstrations appears to be a little too much of a coincidence. Can we also be sure that the reason for listening to the listeners is motivated by terrorism and not business interests and our old friend greed? Not least as the surveillance infrastructure was in place prior to the 11th of September, which raises another doubt on why the 11th of September wasn't prevented. Even this is probably too simplistic and just a side benefit of carving up the world into post-Cold War spheres of economic influence so that the interim losers are actually allies, maybe even one's fellow citizens. But governments across the world have invested in surveillance equipment, believing that it is they who are really doing the listening. As they listen, the dark truth that their loyal subjects are not so loyal and do not really appreciate all that's being done on their behalf. Is this jealousy? Maybe. Slowly such messages convince the leaders that it is them and us, and that their subjects cannot be trusted, and the only solution is an authoritarian one. Also, slowly the conspiracies from both sides are proved correct, and this difference becomes a gulf. This is how fear consumes our leaders and how they establish the worst possible institutions and mechanisms to ensure the greatest good for their electorates. It is through this process of fear, secrecy and colluding with the untrustworthy that I presume is how we ended up invading Iraq. But maybe I'm being too charitable to Tony Blair. Like everyone else, I will never know. Of course, leaders console themselves that they know better, that they have our best interests at heart, that some things are too imperious to be shared. All, paradoxically, reasons for not engaging in conspiracy. No man was ever good enough, brave enough, or strong enough to have such power at his disposal as real leadership implies. The unofficial Reform Committee, the miners' next step. But being corrupted by power is a Western disease. In Indonesia, people seek power to abuse it, so the corruption occurs even before they have gained power. Maybe this is the reason why the bizarre episode involving Ratna Sarumpait occurred when it did. As I contemplate whether Ratna has simply been inflicted with the disease of greed and hypocrisy which are rampant in Jakarta, or are politics more sinister and manipulative than I care to comprehend. This reminds me of another process, which is so ubiquitous it must be natural. Indeed, Karl Popper describes it as the paradox of tolerance, although I disagree with his conclusion. Just as well-meaning politicians become corrupted as soon as their liberal instincts are challenged, so too are our leaders. An alternative theory is they are blackmailed by a security service. When we're hit with a financial crisis, governments all around the world explained to the public that there was a need for austerity, as this was necessary to mend the capitalist system. I, along with most concerned citizens, accepted the need for austerity, despite history proving this to be the worst possible reaction. But then, when we observed the very people who were responsible for the crisis, far from sharing the austerity, but benefiting from the crisis, we all began to question the rectitude. One could even argue that the Brexit vote and Donald Trump's election were reactions to this betrayal. Both votes gave those who believed they were the chosen ones, somehow above normal people, a bloody nose, but no more. Pro-Brexit politicians interpret the vote as a desire to bring power back to London, when really it was a vote to bring power back to Boston, Lincolnshire. Or am I being naive in missing the behavioural programming which has destroyed even our political system? There is little mention of how the UK has not taken away local democracy, but local delivery of public services. Going online is so seductive. Frontline service staff no longer have to be abused by service users. Assets can be rationalised and controlled and can be consolidated. That these project efficiencies are never realised is immaterial, as the chief executive has already been awarded a large pay rise based on the projected savings. But we missed how it was communist China who bailed out our global capitalism, as we were too busy doing our bit and coping with austerity. We also missed how the election of Trump will lead to the end of the US dollar as a reserve currency. Maybe this is the real impetus for Brexit, as London can make more from facilitating the rise of the renminbi than it ever could from euro dollars, or even to avoid new European legislation which would make it far more difficult for the city to invest ill-gotten money of the world's super rich. Pete Townsend wrote, "We don't get fooled again." But memories are short, and we continue to be fooled again and again and again, myself included. Why? Because the hegemony is so powerful and the conspiracy of silence so pervasive. We settle back into our comfortable existence, accepting the crumbs from the table, content that we are back in the game. And with my resumption of the game, I'm happy to label it as society or the inside of the cave, rather than the allowing the paranoia to take over by contemplating the matrix. Currently, there is concern about the potential for Chinese security to use Huawei systems for gathering intelligence. But why are the United States so concerned? Could it be because this simply erodes their own duopoly on electronic information gathering, a duopoly with Israel following the success of the promised software? Whilst the obscene greed of the banks and the unsustainable debt is more than capable of destroying capitalism, indeed the battle for the reserve currency will be devastating, I still maintain that surveillance provides the biggest threat. Once security services have really worked out how to use big data, the psychopathic assumptions they will make about civilization and humanity will destroy both, plunging the majority of us back into the dark ages. As McFadden Whitehead and Carstoffen asked, "Where will you go when the party's over?" For when there is no truth in fellow humans, there is no enterprise nor innovation and no reason for individuals to cooperate. The only sanction being complete repression, which in the long run cannot prevail. Put another way, surveillance undermines the hegemony which the elite have been so clever in developing and ensuring that we subjugate ourselves. Or why would they impose 1984 when they have already created a brave new? I am as guilty as our leaders. As soon as I started to employ people in my business, I inaugurated work-life balance policies, profit sharing, and encouraged employees to develop their own business ideas, which I would invest in. These policies served me well, very well, and the business flourished, although no employee developed a business idea. When met with adversity, we all accept wage restraint and employees and lower profits, to be rewarded with higher wages and our profit share when times were good. But once the financial crisis really hit my business, there was nothing left for me but than to implement my own austerity. Had my business continued, and had I been able to continue employing people, I'm sure I would not have been so generous in my wage and employment policies that I once was. I needed to retrieve some of what I had personally lost during the crisis, and needed more equity in the business to withstand future crises. Whilst a natural reaction, it perfectly illustrates how well-meaning people become corrupted by the overall riding impulse for organisational survival. But aren't people more important than the organisation? Not when we begin to fool ourselves that without control of the organisation, a religious hierarchy, the government, the nation, the human cannot survive. So the underlying reason is fear, yet most of our voluntary services are based on this emotion. Having mentioned Brexit, I began to consider the British economy and pondered how it focused on fear, deception and fraud. All of the UK's biggest industries are either involved in deception or selling false hopes. Public services which are based on creating the illusion of scarcity and fear. Financial services, so much of which is devoted to money laundering. The drug industry, including brewing, spirits and tobacco. The sex industry in its widest possible definition. The arms industry, military and security industries, the cosmetic industry and the fashion industry. Of course I could continue. What of arts and entertainment? Even the food industry is tainted by producing foods which fail to satisfy our dietary needs. But then maybe the same applies across the world's economies. How much of our endeavour is actually devoted to supplying our actual needs? It would seem to me that we have not allowed in human endeavour to be diverted to manufacturing false desires and the fulfilment of them, or at least fleetingly and partially. Nevertheless, I have commented for the last 10 years, every business deal I have been engaged in has been fraudulent. I hasten to add, never intentionally from my part, and the perpetrators have normally been British. Also, to my amazement, I find the UK pound to be the most counterfeited currency in the world. So maybe deception and fraud at the highest level permeate and destroy all levels of society. Certainly I concluded this about Indonesia long ago. Why would the UK be any different? Should I be surprised? Not if I'd given any thought to it. After all, the UK killed 50,000 to protect its rights to deal in hard drugs, whilst the world's first secret police and external intelligence services were created by Rosicrucian and occultist Elizabethans. If I haven't already ensured that I will not be honoured by Her Majesty, then my next observations will ensure it. possibly even that I spend my next visit to the UK in the Tower. Although I've long since believed that most honours are awarded for lying through one's teeth for Queen and country, something I am most likely to be ever asked to do, nor unlikely to ever do, nor be asked to. Now, given Oscar's links to MI6, I speculate that so much of our trade infrastructure was really a spy infrastructure. No wonder MI6 has moved effortlessly into industrial espionage. But what does this mean for the logic of Brexit? Now, call me a cynic, but I could never see selling Tonnock's caramel wafers to Indonesia as the UK's salvation, nor even Scotland's, not least as Indonesia already has an indigenous alternative. But add to our potential trading partners' knowledge of the duplicity behind the UK's trade efforts, and you will understand the reluctance to embrace the UK as a new independent partner. I'm also certain that the products of the UK industry are false desires. Imagine a wonderful tasting but scarce food. For me, could be lobster. It's so scarce that you can either share a meal with your family or eat a full meal by yourself. Which would you choose? If we share, we can discuss how wonderful it is, and is not that a greater pleasure than actually consuming it? But some would keep it all for themselves, not so much enjoying the taste, but their superiority and power over their family and humanity. Believe me, the pleasure of this selfishness is short-lived but addictive. It breeds jealousy and, above all, fear that you will lose this privilege. But do not mistake this for happiness. It's the exact opposite. It's the emptiness of shopping which reduces us to vacant drones. The second choice is the choice which has already been taken by the elite, by our leaders. It is actually the decision they have taken many times in climbing the greasy pole. And yes, they are actually the worst people we should put our faith in. Of course, they justify their actions through a smokescreen of having worked hard for their money. They're faced with so much pressure, a little luxury will help them relax. There's not enough to feed everyone. They deserve it. But we know it's really selfishness and greed, however they attempt to disguise it. These are the platitudes that the politicians and civil servants comfort themselves with in their retirement, for they made sacrifices for the greater good. But the sacrifice was my career. All they sacrificed was their principles. I have a livelihood to think of. I believe this is the best option. You offend me. Really? You see, ultimately, the payoff is never great enough. What is an OBE, even a knighthood, when you have compromised your morals? Selfish persons are incapable of loving others, but they're not capable of loving themselves either. Eric Fromm, Man for Himself. These issues are playing on the minds of my former belligerents, now they have retired. I take no joy from this knowledge, simply to reflect on the waste of human endeavour, both mine and theirs, and for what? To demolish council estates and build another shopping mall? Of course, I have the benefit of hindsight, but when unloved council houses and dysfunctional communities are destroyed for awe-inspiring shopping malls, there are few wet eyes. So ironic that following the 11th of September, George Bush advised us to go shopping. But when we are no longer clamouring to spend our leisure time in a mall and our children are sleeping in bankrupted shop doorways, the sparkle has gone. I recall as a teenager and young adult visiting Birmingham Locarno, Blackpool Mecca, Halesowen in Tiffany's, Manchester Ritz, Newcastle Tiffany's, Preston Top Rank, Sheffield Samantha's, the Sherwood Rooms, Nottingham, Shrewsbury Tiffany's, Stafford Top of the World, Talk of the Midlands, Derby, and others I forget. Even then, I was unimpressed by the plastic palm trees and tartan carpets, and how we would now find them vulgar. The same is becoming apparent to our fantasy malls, so lacking in character compared to our high streets. But it is more than the high streets that the malls displaced. They took away our love of the countryside, ancient monuments, museums, gardening, fishing, baking, playing cards, dominoes, painting, and a whole range of leisure activities, some no longer available, whilst others have lost their appeal. In fact, I am now dreaming of events within my life where I believe a completely different trajectory and universe was created. Like my exposure to corruption, they were on the face of it quite innocent events, when I spoke the truth, only to be called by naive by all around me. But just maybe these are fundamental crossroads in our lives, and those that Allah will judge us on. I do hope I'm right, because it is better to have been naive than greedy, conspiratorial and godlike. So maybe history is more cock-up than conspiracy, as my Illuminatum are justified and ancient, with still no master plan. Lyle, Colty and Drummond. But do not completely dismiss conspiracy, nor insist on evidence of conspiratorials sitting together and discussing the act as a court of law would do. You see, as a student, it was drummed into me that in order to prove conspiracy, it was this strict legal definition we needed to apply. So it became my quest. You may well wonder why I was so keen to embark on such a quest. Well, my mother was always telling me not to tell others about this or that, or behave in certain ways, because what would the neighbours think? Such advice was irrational to me, and I developed an aversion to secrecy, even spending my life as a researcher uncovering the truth. Then when finally my hard work was rewarded and I came upon evidence that could identify the conspirators, where they were and when they had met, the full weight of the state and big business was then brought down on me, putting more grease on my pole and destroying my career as an academic. Whilst I make no exaggerated claims as where it had gone, I note that now my former contemporaries are respected international academics, even vice-chancellors. Of course, the issue you are pilloried for is rarely the one which has offended, and rarely does it make sense, yet the weight of the force gives it credence. Those financially benefiting from the conspiracy hid behind the draperies of the state, as it is a function of power to hide power. And it was the senior civil servants whom were later honoured, and a future government minister and whip who were drafted in to attack me. Such is the nature of conspiracy. Highlighting how government, including local, have become administrators of business interests. No wonder they view their electorate with such contempt. But in general, these conspiracies of ideas and belief, conspiracies which lead some humans to believe that they're above others, and that acting in concert with other members of the elite to harm humanity is their privilege, destiny, even their burden. Such ideas develop into a dishonest way of working and contempt for the public, which is all too apparent with the institutions I implicated. In years to come, maybe the conspiracy I covered will be fully exposed, the actors absolved for believing it was in the public interest, and those who materially lost from the conspiracy, myself included, long since passed on. But in the second half of my life, I am proud to have been called naive, proud to have asked questions to which there was no answer, and proud not to have sacrificed another for the public good. Maybe had I had risen further up the greasy pole, I could not have such a clear conscience, and would have made more compromises, losing my naivety, and with it my soul. But then I share the deceit with most of you, that we believe that the world shares our moral code, including a revulsion to greed and naked self-interest. One only has to look, and the world is full of conspiracies. In fact, there is credible evidence for a conspiracy behind almost anything you could think of. So does that mean that everything is a conspiracy? Of course not, except at its most esoteric extrapolation. But that one conspiracy is proved to be false does not make every other conspiracy fictitious. Not even the hegemony to which I have alluded, for ye also manufacture and replicate this hegemony. Herein lies the prevalence of the conspiracy theorists. Whilst access to the internet spreads such theories, but I'm also sure that most of us are personally aware of some conspiracy or collusion, however small it might be. Once we realise that the world is not as we were taught or led to believe, it is only natural that we should look for further conspiracies. What is relevant is not whether or not there is a cover-up behind the 11th of September, nor that the majority of the conspiracy theories are false, but that collusion and conspiracy do exist, and that some of it has a major impact on our lives. Indeed, could it be that the prevalence of conspiracies is itself a conspiracy? As what better way to hide a conspiracy than within a plague of conspiracies? Nor indeed to hide the truth within fake news. But we all have knowledge of some conspiracies, and are too lazy or too frightened to expose them. And maybe like me, you've already had your wings clipped. But then knowing of conclusion on the construction of a shopping mall is hardly the same as constructing terrorism, and we can sink back into the comfort of our ignorance. There are some big conspiracies and many smaller ones, but what links them is hegemony, not a grand conspiracy. This means that whilst the direction may be the same, motivation may be different for each conspiracy. So I do not look towards Jewish bankers, the Illuminati, reptilian species, but scrutinise myself and my family, neighbours and friends, and how we will contribute to our own servitude because we are programmed to do so. Thinking of the 11th of September, the issue is both the truth movement and the official version of events contain numerous unlikely conspiracies, and maybe this is a reflection of so many world events. The same is true of fake news. Yes, the alternative new media is full of fake news, but this simply competes with the official fake news, which suppresses an individual's dangerous libidinal energies, as Edward Bernays put it, providing a scientific excuse for manipulation. What has gone wrong has always been thus. Partially, yes, but I recall when I exposed my own conspiracy and the UK's press was camped on my doorstep, I was taken to one side and told how naive I was. It was explained that news was a part of the entertainment industry, and that this was more important than investigating an absolute truth. So once those with power over us behave in a godlike manner, and in doing so have taken away the public's confidence in them, The reason why traditional news outlets are struggling to survive is that they treated their readers and viewers with contempt, just like the 1970s nightclubs and shopping malls. Eventually we get tired of consuming their empty promises and being bullied by their security personnel. While the boomers may have enjoyed how Fordism was applied to their leisure time, there are significant indications on how these behemoths are being rejected by their offspring, leaving only health and financial services where the elite can continue to exploit us. Earlier, I described marketing of insurance as the ultimate dark magic, but maybe another contender for this crown is public relations. If news is fake, mere entertainment and hegemony, then those feeding the stories really are the magicians of the modern age. We may complain about how much footballers are paid, but maybe the bigger disservice to humanity is that our brightest young people work in advertising, marketing and public relations, all the darkest of arts. Then again, such a profession would appeal to the psychopathic traits, as the spinning of lies is so innate, although maybe not as attractive as the intelligence service. Ironically, Sigmund Freud's great-grandson, Matthew, continued the family business, leading the Trojan horse of public relations into news, making us doubt truth, perhaps forever. Our problem, in which deception has become organised and strong, where truth is poisoned as its source, one in which the skill of the shrewd brains is devoted to misleading the bewildered people. Walter Lippmann, A Preface to Politics. Yes, there are conspiracies, but cock-ups are more prevalent, as Yanis Varoufakis so graphically describes. I have prematurely ended my description of the elite, leaving you to ponder who is controlling the elite. The Bush family, Illuminati, Jewish bankers, reptilian creatures, aliens? Almost certainly not. But in creating a society of fear, our politicians are in the hands of their own security services, if they weren't already through a honey trap exercise, whom for security reasons are not properly scrutinised. Such power was handed to our security services at wartime, as the first casualties of war is the truth, and terrorism provides a perfect excuse for peacetime continuance. But once they have such power, it is nearly impossible to wrest it from them. Whilst conspiracies almost certainly do exist, the main reason for this is simply the process by which organisations attempt at all cost to survive and probably flourish. It is probably the world's security services who have decided that it is desirable to capture data on everyone and everything, not because such information is useful in combating terrorism or pursuing national interests, but simply because they could. Indeed, 90% of the information captured and stored is completely unconnected to terrorism. You see, their remit is to collect intelligence. So few working in security would not jump at the chance of collecting information on everything. Again, it's only natural. But the world's security services are now so swamped with your personal information that they're unable to function to protect us from the very forces we pay them to protect us from, even if these are only other security forces. So is this data never used? On the contrary, once a security service decides on a target, they have enough information on them to ensure that they in future comply with their wishes. This is an inevitable consequence of distrust in others and believing that resources are scarce and that the world is full of danger. So what is a national security service without spies, micro cameras and honey traps? Like the banks, it's increasingly about its data storage and algorithms to retrieve data, which is now largely supplied by the US and Israel. So can they any longer be seen as national? All of which only adds further questions about the role of organised crime rather than the nation state. Certainly, both organised crime and security services have a long tradition of using honey traps and working together. It is the Epstein case, or should I say the Maxwell case, which has led us to question the sovereignty of the nation state and its leaders, as it now looks likely that the world is fought over by competing and sometimes collaborating crime families, with many of the world's leaders part of these families. It is certainly these crime families and not the nation state which work with and possibly direct the security services to subjugate. Well, that concludes this chapter from my book, The Londo and the Green Queen's Revenge, which is my third book in the series. I do hope you've enjoyed it. I'm hoping to add further chapters about every week, and so far I've managed to do this. If you'd like to hear more from me, then please subscribe and hit the bell. That way you get notifications of when a new chapter is released. In addition, I don't seem to be working very well with these algorithms on YouTube, and my videos really aren't being promoted as they should. So if you could also hit the like button and sort of make some comments, I think that will help me to get noticed. I hate to ask you that, but I really do need more viewers. But thank you for this viewing. Thank you so much.